Good morning. How are we doing this morning? Today's May 10th, Saturday morning. I used to get up early on Saturday mornings to watch cartoons as a kid, right? Now I get up early on Saturday mornings to do a Bible study, right? Today is May 10th. The theme for today is timing. And it seems like God's timing is always the best and always accurate. But who are we letting guide us, and where are we going is one of the questions for today we want to really think about with today's reading. We'll allow everybody to connect. Don't forget to check in with comments or likes. And here, let me get a sip of coffee real quick. I have my coffee cup that my wonderful sister-in-law got me, So Elizabeth is constantly showering me with gifts, right? So that coffee cup's just one of the many. So as we look at God's timing this morning, we're going to see some things being synchronized or controlled to a certain extent, right? We're in 1 Samuel, Samuel 9, chapter 9 this morning, or chapter 8 this morning, 8 and 9. But we'll start with chapter 8, verse 1. And you'll remember at this point in time that the Israelites are being led by judges, right? Prophets. They don't have a king, right? But Samuel, who's been a very good judge and leader for Israel, is getting old. And so it starts off in 1 Samuel chapter 8. It says, as Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons to be judges over Israel. Joel and Abijah, the oldest sons, held court in Beersheba. But they were not like their father, for they were greedy with money. They accepted bribes and perverted justice. Sounds a little bit like government as we know it today, right? So it's a theocratic leadership in Israel, right? The judges and prophets, and versus a king or a monarchy, right? But there's a lack of trust in Samuel's sons to take over as judges to lead Israel. So the people ask for a king. They want a king to lead them. So there's a lack of leadership. But why not ask for just a better judge? Why not just say, well, we want judges that are honest and have integrity? What are the other thoughts of why they think they want a king, right? Could a king provide better safety maybe? And that's what they were concerned about, going to war and having to fight off other nations. The other nations have kings. Why don't we have a king? And so it's easy to think that way from a human perspective, but that really wasn't the way God intended for them to be able to live and operate, right? They did want to be like everybody else, but to me, it's a bit of a cry for leadership. They're struggling with the mindset that they know they need leadership. What that also means is there's a lack of individual leadership in the tribes or in the people, right? So they're not strong standing on their own. They look for somebody else to tell them what to do, when to do it, how to do it. To be their standard keepers, so to speak, right? There is a valid need, but who are you going to trust? That's one of the questions. That's one of the issues they have, right? So, the bottom line is seek the Lord, and the Lord is the one that will be able to guide us. And through Samuel, he was guiding them, but now they're going to transition and they look for a different leader. Why did the Lord allow this? Why did the Lord allow them to transition and go to a leadership of a monarchy? Again, God gave us free will. And even though it wasn't God's will, that's not what God intended. It's not what God wanted. And Samuel kept telling the tribes that, this is not the way. But the reality of it was that that's what they wanted. That's what the people wanted. And God will let us make choices and let us live with those consequences. And he's going to do it with Israel. He's going to let them choose what they want, right? The way we have to stay in concert with God's will is we have to seek his perfect will. And I think the Israelites, they didn't understand that at this point in time, right? And that's why the Israelites are constantly struggling to live a godly life in the way God intended for them, and to reap the benefits that he had for them, right? The promised land. But a king comes at a cost, and Samuel's trying to explain this to him, right? That even as they go into this transition, they want to think about better security. But he's going to take more than just 1/10. That king is going to need a lot. He told him that the king's going to want your best. He's going to want your best sons, daughters, slaves, your best harvest, right? And the best of your herds. He's going to want all of that for himself and his family, right? He's always going to also need a standing army, because if he's going to help lead you and defend Israel against these other nations, then he's got to be prepared for that. So he's going to need chariots. He's going to need horses. He's going to need men to walk with the chariots, right? So he's going to need a standing army, and that army is first going to protect the king and his family, but then secondarily be there to try to help fight for the nation. But the king and his army aren't going to be able to defend the nation on their own. They're always going to ask the men of Israel to come in and join to go to war and fight. So again, there's that cost on a daily basis for that king to be in leadership. But he also has to deter any other nation from taking them. So he has the fact that he has a standing army is a deterrence that might prevent many of the other nations from attacking Israel. That's one of the side benefits. And to me, this whole discussion, this whole engagement in Samuel 8 is a natural human calling. And what I mean by that is human needs. Our primary need is food, water, shelter. And we will always try to fulfill that first. I need food, I need water, I need shelter. After that, then we start thinking about the other things, philosophical things. We now have time for God in our life. And when I teach on this, God is just the opposite, right? He is love first and foremost. He is truth, right? He is provision. He is all of those things. And his love for man is the first thing he provides, but man's love for God is the last thing man can usually think of. And that's why we tend to be older in years when we finally decide to get serious about coming to the Lord. And so it's part of human nature, and I think the fall of man that we need to understand. In this case, Israel's willing to trade all of their freedoms, really a majority of their wealth, and even their own children for their personal security. That's really what they're trying to do. That's really what they're asking God to do, is give us a king, and we'll give away all these other things to have that king. So where is God in all of that priority from the Israelites? You know, where is he in their pecking order? And again, he's at the bottom. And again, that's why I think God at times struggled with the Israelites. But why is he always at the bottom? When do we finally have time for God, and when will the Israelites finally have time for God? So this is the whole introductory to a new character in the Bible. Saul is going to become king, and we're going to get introduced to Saul and where he comes from. So we jump to 1 Samuel 9. There was a wealthy, influential man named Kish from the tribe of Benjamin. Now remember, tribe of Benjamin got depleted quite a bit out of all the Israelite tribes. And so it's a very small tribe. But in that tribe, there's a man named Kish. And verse 2, his son Saul was the most handsome man in Israel, head and shoulders taller than anyone else. So imagine that there's this tall, handsome, I'm imagine like the model, right? You know, the GQ model that walks up and just, you know, handsome, tall. Everybody else in Israel is basically about this height to him. So he's head and shoulders above everybody. So he had to be a sight to see. He had to be impressive to look at, right? And Saul's father sent him and a servant out to look for the donkeys. Remember, the donkeys wandered off. And so Saul and this servant are going to go look for the donkeys. But after a lot of effort, you know, Saul is a little bit frustrated and I think concerned. And he's considering turning back because he knows, well, it won't be long and everybody's going to be worried about us because, you know, we should have found him by now. So it makes me ponder, how good of a donkey finder is Saul, right? He's going out to look for donkeys, but him and a servant couldn't find them. So maybe the donkeys were really good hiders. I don't know, but it makes me kind of question some things, and I want to understand Saul's character, not just the fact that he's handsome and tall. All right. So the servant and Saul are discussing, you know, should we turn back? And they come up with, let's seek divine guidance. Let's ask God. Let's go to the Holy One and let's go seek out Samuel and find from that. Now again, you got to understand, they're seeking out the leader of all of Israel at this point in time. So it's kind of like, well, let's go talk to Trump about where our donkeys might be. Think about it in that context. It's kind of like, well, you don't just barge in and ask that. So they know they want to have something to bring and give. So there's some kind of an offering or gift to make it worth Samuel's effort to see Saul. But this is a small step with an intended purpose to find what was lost, right? But what they're really trying to seek and find or fix is a reality in the physical realm, right? In other words, they have a physical realm need, but they're seeking divine guidance to fill that physical realm need. Now, in that, what is behind the scenes is it's really Saul stepping into his own destiny, and he doesn't know it yet. It's the spiritual control of leading Saul into his destiny. It wasn't a spiritual quest that brought Saul to Samuel. It was a physical need, right? Wanting to find these donkeys. So likewise, Jesus used physical healings. He fulfilled physical needs as a way to show the control of the spiritual realm over the physical realm, right? And through that, Jesus would draw men to himself and told us to do the same. So we have that kind of control through Jesus, and that's what we're supposed to utilize and provide in the world, all right? Many see the church today as irrelevant because many churches tend to only talk about the spiritual and peace and love and how we feel internally. We don't think about, but all of that is to grow us and allow us to provide for the physical needs in this world, right? And to heal each other and to help each other. I mean, again, I think sometimes we forget or we lose perspective of what God intended the church to be, right? And again, when I say the church, I'm not talking about a building anywhere. Nowhere in the Bible does it describe the church as a building, any kind of building, nice building or poor building. It talks of the church as the people, the body of people operating as one, as the church, right? So God tells Samuel that Saul is coming. So Samuel knows to expect Saul. And Saul is assuming he's going to be a bit of a burden on Samuel when he gets there. But notice the timing of all this. Saul and his servant had spent days looking for their lost animals, right? Yet they arrived at the exact city, at the exact time, the right opportunity, when Samuel would be there, number one, for an offering and a sacrifice, but that, God was supernaturally leading them to that point in time. But he was also preparing Samuel for the fact that they were going to be at that point in time. So again, that's where, we talk about destiny. Well, that's where God is controlling and leading us to our destiny if we'll listen and follow. And in this case, Saul, does follow. Whatever that guidance that he's getting, he's following that, right? So God was supernaturally leading them along, but they were oblivious to what was really going to happen, right? Certainly they also were directed by the Lord more than we are directed by the Lord more than we realize, as well as Saul was directed by the Lord more than he probably realized. But then that makes me beg the question, okay, did the donkeys really truly wander off on their own? Or was the Lord behind that? Did the Lord lead the donkeys astray such that Saul would be sent out to find them? What level of control is it that the Lord might have done that? Or is it just that because of that occurrence, it helped ignite the perfect opportunity to send Saul out after him, right? So the Lord might have influenced just Saul going after him. I'm not saying one way or the other, but I ponder these things at times. I try to think deeper about where is the fingerprint of the Lord's touch on what's going on around us in the world, and even back in this time from a historical perspective, right? So let's jump to 1 Samuel 9, right? And I'm jumping to verse 19. When they first encounter Samuel and they ask about who he is, and Samuel replies with, "I am the seer," right, or the prophet Samuel. "Go up to the place of worship ahead of me. We will eat there together, and in the morning I'll tell you what you want to know and send you on your way." Now, again, in Saul's mind, he's thinking, okay, yeah, this is about the donkeys. And don't worry about those donkeys that were lost 3 days ago, for they have been found. So imagine Saul's impression. Wait a minute, I'm here to find out where the donkeys are. And the first thing that Samuel tells him is, I'm going to tell you a lot of stuff that you're here to hear. However, the donkeys have already been found. It's kind of like, well, that's the whole reason we came, right? So I got to think at this point in time, there's probably a little bit of confusion in Saul's mind about, well, okay, but if the donkey's been found, then we basically can turn around and head back, right? And Saul continues and says, and I am here to tell you that you and your family are the focus for all of Israel's hopes. So again, I feel like this has got to be a little confusing to Saul at the time. And he's kind of pondering, well, but how am I got any role in any of this? Because again, he sees himself of small stature, right? And from a small tribe in Israel. So Saul replied, verse 21, but I am only from the tribe of Benjamin. I'm only from the tribe of Benjamin. So he sees the tribe of Benjamin as being very lowly, right? The smallest tribe of Israel. And my family is the least important of all the families of that tribe. Why are you talking like this to me? Again, he's confused and a little bit astounded that he's being almost praised or put up on a pedestal to a certain extent. And he's confused by that because he sees himself as very lowly, right? So Samuel told Saul about the donkeys before Saul even asked. Saul didn't say, hey, we're here to find our donkeys. Samuel told him before Saul even got to that point, right? So would this not convince you immediately that this man of God truly has situational awareness and understanding of what's going on around him in the world right at this point in time? So imagine that's the surprise on Saul that Samuel told us already the minute we got there, right? But in this engagement, how does Saul see himself? He sees his tribe as lowly, and then he sees him and his family as low in the tribe, in the pecking order in the tribe, right? So he doesn't have a strong self-esteem, even though this is supposed to be the tallest and most handsome man in all of Israel. Well, you'd think that just walking around and the girls Google-eyed him as he walks by would make him feel some kind of strength or stature. But he has low self-confidence, right? So in the same question, how do we see ourselves compared to how the Lord see us? And how did the Lord see Saul? If Saul saw himself as lowly, but how did the Lord see him? Now, in this, I don't think, first of all, remember, the Lord didn't want a king. That wasn't the Lord's way, right? The Lord allowed Israel to have a king. But the Lord picked the king, but he didn't necessarily pick the king that the Lord would have wanted to pick. When the Lord does pick a king, you later will see he picks David. But let's compare kind of David and Saul from that perspective. Saul represents the human desire. Tall, handsome, tall, dark, and handsome, right? All those positive character traits. But the Lord's looking for internal character traits. And I'm not saying that Saul doesn't have some of those or can't grow some of those, but we'll find as we go further into Saul's history with the Israelites that he has a lot of failures. Of course, David does too. Everybody, we're all human. They all have failures, but part of it, could they have strived to have been more, right? If they would have tended to the Lord's calling and they would have been following the Lord in everything they did. So we know that Samuel treated Saul as a special guest, right? Which again had to be a little bit of a surprise to Saul in all of this. Even though Saul really didn't understand it. He didn't understand why or what it was leading to, right? So I'm sure this confusion was making him question things going on because Saul had very low expectations. So wait a minute, he's approaching the godly man, he's approaching the prophet who can tell him, from God where his donkeys are, but yet he's not thinking about this as the perspective of what are my expectations of meeting with this man and what this man could how he might change my life, right? And so understand at this point, Samuel is basically the leader of the nation again, right? He is, in a sense, their king, even though they have no king. So he's got that level of importance, is what I want you to understand. But Saul also now knows that the donkeys are back home, right? And that Samuel has more to tell him. So he's got to stick around to kind of feel this out, right? Think about how God has steered each person and perhaps even the donkeys in this endeavor. And then think about how he steers us, right? Are we receptive to being steered or led where the Holy Spirit will lead us? I think that's the real key in all of this reading this morning from the Old Testament. Let's think about that and think about our human desires and choices, shelter, food, water, shelter, compared to what God really wants to provide us, which is much more. He obviously wants to provide that, but that's nothing compared to what all he has for us. So as we start looking at the New Testament, we go to John 6, verse 22 through 42. And we pick up from yesterday where Jesus, he'd fed the 5,000, and then he walked on water to get to the other side. And in verse 22, the next day, the crowd that had stayed on the far shore saw that the disciples had taken the only boat, and they realized Jesus had not gone with them. Several boats from Tiberias landed near the place where the Lord had blessed the bread, and the people had eaten. So when the crowd saw that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and went across to Capernaum to look for him. They found him on the other side of the lake and asked, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" So people are seeking Jesus. That's a key point. They're searching for him. The real question is, though, why? The why behind it. And Jesus knows the why. You know, he feels like he showed them true miraculous influence of the spiritual realm over the physical realm by feeding the 5,000. Now, the people that are finding him at this point in time don't know that he walked on water, but the disciples do. But Jesus doesn't tell them, and really there's no encounter of letting the disciples tell them of that miracle. But it's because he's shown them so many miracles, and yet they don't believe. They're not seeking him for being God. They're seeking him for a free meal. So in verse 26, Jesus replied, "I tell you the truth. You want to be with me because I fed you, not because you understood the miraculous signs." I mean, here he clearly just tells them to their face, right? This seems a bit sad to me, that, you know, they don't know of all of the miracles he's performed, but they know of many of them, right? But he knows the true desires of their heart. Again, food, water, shelter. So it's just like the Israelites in the Old Testament. It's the same song, same verse. It's the same problem. The fact that Jesus is standing in front of these people, and yet they look inward for those human needs, right? Instead of thinking at the grander things that you're hearing before the Son of God and why is he here, right? To provide everlasting life. And instead of getting what they can get from him in fullness, they want just the simple needs met, right? So again, it's almost like they're looking for a handout. Again, searching for personal security, not a relationship with God. And have people changed? Or is this not what we see in the world today? Again, you know, it's so easy to get caught up in that. Well, I just need that $1,000, you know, by next week for rent, instead of thinking about, well, if I have the strong relationship with God, I won't have to worry about it. His provision will always be there and provide. Just like Saul was at the right place and time, that $1,000 you need will be at the right place and time, right? Because it's through that relationship. Then the people ask about how they can perform God's works too, and Jesus replies in verse 29. Jesus told them, "This is the only work God wants for you. Believe in the one he has sent." And then their response again kind of baffles me. They answered in verse 30, "Show us a miraculous sign if you want us to believe in you, what you can do. After all, our ancestors ate manna while they journeyed through the wilderness. The scriptures say Moses gave them bread from heaven to eat." Now, before we move on, you know, again to Jesus' response, let's stop and look at this. It's right back to the human needs, right? I want food. Just show us a miraculous sign. Give us a bunch of food, right? As a miraculous sign. It's almost like they want him to do a cheap trick like a dog. You know, sit up, beg, whatever, to convince us that we should do these things, right? And these people are Israelites. They remember their history because they just talked about Moses and the manna, so they know God can do miraculous things. But yet they seem so shallow in what they're expecting from God in this case, right? So how close can people be to consider it the perfect solution, i.e. Jesus standing in front of you, and he can provide the perfect future for you, and yet miss the point and focus on just the superficial needs of the day? I just want food for today. You know what I'm saying? And we think we're being humble in that case, but in fact, we're being inward and we're being greedy in our approach to dealing with God, right? So in verse 32, Jesus said, "I tell you the truth, Moses didn't give you bread from heaven. My Father did." I mean, that is clear cut. I mean, it's amazing that Jesus is pointing these things out so clearly, and yet it seems to go over their head, right? He continues, he says, he's trying to clarify the gravity of this situation a bit, right? He's trying to get them in perspective. And he says, "And now he offers you the true bread from heaven. The true bread of God is the one who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Now he's speaking of himself, but again, they don't correlate all these things. It's constantly seems like Jesus is constantly attempting to show them that there's much more available to you than just these superficial desires that you keep coming back to. But he can't get them to respond to what I call the deeper question, right? Or to look at that. And because he confused them a little bit with he's the bread from heaven, now in verse 41, the people began to murmur in disagreement because he had said, I am the bread that came down from heaven. So now they start to question, well, isn't this Jesus, the son of Joseph, this guy we've met and we've seen? He's been around here for years. We know his father and mother. How can he say, I came down from heaven? So now they want to question every little thing he says. But yet, he fed 5,000 yesterday. Give me a break. I mean, you can't understand that what this guy's telling you has got truth in it that you don't comprehend. I mean, but they want to now get nitpicky. Now they want to start trying to take every little word and tear it apart. This is, again, a typical human response if we allow ourselves to stay in that human state, that fallen human state, right? We have to dig deeper in seeking the truth, right? And, are we really prepared? Are we really trying to seek the truth, seek Jesus? Or are we just trying to seek the provisioning, that $1,000 for next week, right? And then are we truly prepared to receive? Are we preparing our heart for that relationship to really receive from Jesus? I think that's the focus we have to have as we continue to go on with these Bible studies, right? What level of faith do you think these Israelites had? And what level of faith do you think we need to have? And then how do we build our faith compared to how they build their faith, right? We got to ask ourselves these questions because I think when we look around the world today, we see the same world that Jesus saw. There's a lot that hasn't changed, and that's our job, is to be that change, right? To be the light in the darkness. And I think we have to step into that. We've got a few minutes left, so we're going to jump into Psalms 106, verse 32 and 32 through 48. We continue with Psalms 106. It was part of the teaching yesterday, right? And it's a bit of a history lesson again, and it covers a lot of the same topics that we've been studying over the last month or so, really, through this Bible study, where we start out how the Israelites angered Moses and caused many of Moses' problems. In fact, Moses didn't go into the promised land because of some of his failures, and a lot of it was his anger of dealing with the Israelites. So again, it's that same story that, again, we hear their truly failed attempt to acquire the promised land. God led them to the promised land, but they failed to destroy the nations. They mingled with the pagans. They adopted their evil customs, worshiped their idols. The list goes on and on. It's all these things that they didn't follow God's leading, right? They didn't follow where God was, he brought them to the promised land, but then they didn't follow the methodology, God's system of how to acquire the promised land, how to receive it, and how to utilize it. And in that, they set themselves up for failure yet again. So even when we look at Proverbs for today, it pretty much sums up all of this in two key statements, two key verses, right? And this, to me, shows us when you take the Old Testament, the New Testament, Psalm, and now let's jump into Proverbs as kind of the capstone that pulls it all back together. Today's teaching is all connected, and it shows that Scripture validates itself. It reminds us of all of it from beginning to end, right? So Proverbs 14, verse 34 and 35. In verse 34, godliness makes a nation great. That's what God expected for Israelites going into the promised land, right? Godliness, right? But sin is a disgrace to any people. Well, that's exactly what they did. They sinned against God. They praised other idols. They mingled with the locals that led them astray. So they did exactly what they shouldn't have done in that circumstance. And then verse 35 says, a king rejoices in wise servants, but is angry with those who disgrace him. Well, the Lord is king. And the reality of it is, he rejoices when we live that godly life, right? And we stay a great nation. But he's angry when we constantly disgrace him. And it's not just the Israelites. I mean, again, look at our society today. So how do we assess our nation today? Do we consider America today a godly nation, right? Are we going to do our part to try to keep it and make it a godly nation? Are we heading in the right direction as a nation? Can we truly honor God as a nation? And I think we have to ask these questions just like the Israelites needed to do, or we follow the same path that they follow, right? We all need to judge this for ourselves, but in that we need to ask ourselves about our personal role. What role do we play, right? Are we part of the solution? Are we just a part of the problem? And I think that's something we constantly have to look in the mirror and ask, right? So just food for thought. We close out this Saturday morning. I hope this provides you some perspective that we can grow on. I hope we can pull into the Bible studies a little deeper, and hopefully it's something we can all reflect on and help us in our decisions of where the Lord is leading us and how we respond to the probings and leadings that He provides us. That's about all the time we have for today. Let me get one more final sip of coffee out of my famous coffee mug. I hope everybody has a blessed Saturday. And we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.